Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And what you're seeing on screen is a comparison chart of all the first responder networks in the United States. This drive testing was done by AT&T, and you can find this chart on firstnet.com. Now, what's interesting about this chart is the coverage comparison, and it's listed in square miles, which is still very important as accidents can happen anywhere that the population goes. It can be on a mountain hike. It can be on a camping trip in the forest. So coverage, the geographic coverage, the landmass, it still does matter. And we have a detailed breakdown here on this comparison chart. Now, this video, we're gonna talk about this from the T-Mobile perspective, because they have been the smaller network and growing. And even after getting Sprint, building out more 600, taking the Sprint retain and the Sprint keep sites, they are still today, per this comparison, the smaller network. But the gap is getting smaller and smaller and smaller by the quarter. So let's look at it real quick. So AT&T is first with FirstNet at 2.99 million square miles covered natively, which is a very, very large reach of the network. Verizon, with Verizon Frontline, they're in second at 2.8 million square miles covered and growing, right? Verizon is always building and adding new towers as well. And then you have T-Mobile with T-Priority in last, but they're at almost 2.7 million, right? 2.69. So they're about 100,000 square miles short of Verizon, and close to almost 300,000 square miles to AT&T. Now, T-Mobile is also growing their footprint, right? They're adding towers, and then you still have Starlink. Once the data and the texting and the calling is all commercial, and we see how that works, and we make the determination if that's feasible for a connection in the parts where T-Mobile's terrestrial network don't reach. You know, we'll have to determine that once those services are live. But for now, T-Mobile is closer to the network size of Verizon and AT&T that they've ever been, and they're still behind quite significantly, right? To put it in perspective, T-Mobile is roughly around twice the size of Nebraska behind Verizon in square miles, just to put that in perspective, right? Nebraska is, the state itself is about, I don't know, 52,000 square miles from east to west. And that's about right around 2 times the size of Nebraska that T-Mobile is behind Verizon. Now that gap is closing little by little, but Verizon is also building more sites and adding new coverage, right? They have I think this year alone, Verizon is doing 5,000 coverage solutions. So that's a lot, right? So, but it keeps T-Mobile in the mix, right? This is where T-Mobile is now. That's where Verizon was a few years ago, and Verizon was already the largest market share in the first responder sector. They already had government accounts. They were doing all that. Verizon, right? That is at I think it was 2.7 million square miles. So T-Mobile can do the same, right? T-Mobile got AAA. They have AAA as a partnership, which AAA, cars break down anywhere, so that requires quite a large network to get AAA, and T-Mobile was able to get AAA. T-Mobile is now getting large Fortune 500 companies. They're getting government contracts. They're getting first responder contracts. They got New York City. They got Chicago PD. They got LA Fire. They have several others too, from small to big. So they're getting there. T-Mobile is getting to a very respectable size of network. Now, the 2.69 million, very, very likely, in my opinion, does include some roaming, right? If it doesn't include roaming from the AT&T drive test, then that's even more impressive, because now the roaming makes T-Mobile's network even larger, right? Just like Verizon as well. We got to point that out. The 2.8 could potentially just be Verizon native, right? Verizon does have certain partnerships, roaming partnerships, where the regional carrier uses Verizon assets, meaning the spectrum, they deploy it, and then Verizon customers can use that area natively, right? I forgot what it's called, but that makes Verizon's network, that much larger with those partnerships. But AT&T with FirstNet, they're claiming native. The 2.99 million, that's natively. Like, that's not anyone else's core, not anyone else's network. It's all AT&T at 2.99 million. That's what AT&T is claiming, the largest native North American network. Some other things to note: dedicated spectrum only FirstNet, physical separated dedicated network core, or physically separated dedicated network core only FirstNet. Federal obligations and accountability FirstNet. Mandate to never throttle FirstNet. Security operating center dedicated, and then T-Mobile and Verizon's are shared with, business, consumer, and everything else. And then dedicated deployable network fleet. FirstNet has a dedicated 180 plus. And then T-Mobile's and Verizon's are shared with consumer and business and whatever else they got going on. So that's the only difference between FirstNet and Verizon and T-Priority, is everything FirstNet related is dedicated to FirstNet. The spectrum, the assets, the core, everything is dedicated. And T-Mobile and Verizon are using the same core for all things network related, IoT, business, consumer, FWA. It's all being used and it's not shared. So to end this video, T-Mobile is closer in coverage than they've ever been before. And I know 100,000 square miles is still quite a lot to be behind that much, and then the 300,000 almost to it's right around 300,000 to FirstNet is even that much more of a bigger gap. So that means there's a lot of coverage out there that Verizon and AT&T cover natively, where T-Mobile has nothing, or they have roaming, or in the future, come July, they'll have some type of Starlink connection, which we'll have to determine and see how that's going to work out, and how that's going to perform from an end user perspective, right? To see how the data throughput works. Can you make calls? How do the calls sound? Are they choppy? Do they drop? All of that will have to be tested, because T-Mobile is going to fill in coverage with Starlink beyond just the areas that are not covered by terrestrial networks. We've come to see that already. So that's not a secret anymore, right? T-Mobile is going to cover white spaces where Verizon and AT&T do have coverage, right? We got to keep that in mind. So of course they are, right? They're not just going to say, oh, we're just going to leave the white spaces white and then only cover where nobody has any service. No, T-Mobile is going to cover white spaces using Starlink. Trust me on that. So let me know your thoughts on this in the comments. Let me know if you're surprised if that Verizon and T-Mobile are fairly close. From a percentage perspective, I think Verizon's at like 77% and T-Mobile's at like almost 74%. So T-Mobile is closing the gap very, very quickly to the competition, and that allows them to further compete for any business that they may want to get into, like, for an example, AAA, Tractor Supply. T-Mobile has several big partnerships now. So let me know your thoughts. Like, share, subscribe. See y'all in the next one. Peace.